All right, everybody, welcome back into the Auburn Live Show. Appreciate everybody for joining us. We got a special guest with us today, the man from On3's Sports, Pete Nakos. Pete, what's up, man?
What's up, man? Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, dude, I wanted to catch up with you. We're going to talk NIL. That's kind of why I wanted to have you on. It's just sort of, hey, where are we at with NIL? There's been some different stuff happening, nationally, and you got this Rashada lawsuit. It's kind of crazy, and I'm sure we'll have a ripple effect. And so I just kind of wanted to catch up with you, big picture NIL, and just sort of see where we're at and all that good stuff. So let's get into that. Before we do, real quick, shout out to one of our main sponsors of the show, Session Cocktail in downtown Auburn. Go check them out right there on Magnolia Avenue when you get a chance. Great place to go have some drinks and bar seating and some booth seating. And it's just a really relaxed place. I think they changed their menu up again. They got trivia on Tuesday nights. They do bingo, I think, on Wednesday nights. I think Mondays now they do happy hour prices all day. So those are some good days to go check them out. And of course, they're always busy Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's a great spot to go before you go to dinner or after dinner. Pop down there for a drink. So go make sure and tell them that you heard about them through Auburn Live. Give us a shout out and go check out Session. Good friends of ours of the show and a great place to get a drink. All right, Pete. NIL. Where are we at big picture? I've seen some stuff kind of with over the last week or so about the potential of $20 million being dispersed to schools. And obviously we think at some point collectives will be brought in-house. We know that's happening at some places already. We think probably at some point there will be just players just straight up getting a cut of revenue, like of athletic department. What's the latest over the last, however many months? Where do you think this thing's at? And what are any important notes that people need to know about kind of where we're at now and where things might be like in a year? Just kind of give me a state of NIL as you see it.
Yeah. So if you're a college sports fan and even college football fan, obviously, you're probably seeing this week already the ACC and the Big 12 presidents have signed off on this House versus NCAA settlement. The SEC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 are all going to vote on that as well. I believe the SEC is today or tomorrow. When you really kind of simmer it all down, what that is it's this big class action lawsuit that the NCAA and all its conferences are going to owe a group of athletes about $2.8 billion in back damages over 9 or 10 years. But in that settlement agreement, that's kind of where you get to revenue sharing. So the top power conference schools are going to be able to opt into a revenue sharing plan that will disperse something like 20 to 22 million per year to athletes at each school. So like an Auburn and Alabama, each would be playing in that 20 to 22 million dollar world. The really interesting thing is athletes really are not involved in any of these discussions at the moment. We keep hearing about these players associations, but there is no collective bargaining going on right now. Athletes are still not formally looked at as employees. So we're in a very interesting time right now in college sports. We're about to go through some unprecedented change, but at the same time, Justin, I don't know if I could tell you what the role of athletes is in all this. On a more granular level, that 20 to 22 million in revenue sharing is going to have to be split up between athletes at Auburn, for example, right? It's not just 22 million for football.
Right.
I think there's every school across the country is trying to figure out how they're going to split that up right now. They also have to factor in Title IX is the understanding. There is no direction of how that's going to look. So in the Auburn atmosphere, for example, let's say the football team ends up getting something like 8 to 10 million. Well, that's a nice chunk of money, but I mean, you know this. So a lot of the top football programs in the country right now probably spend something like 13 to 20 million a year on payroll for football. So I imagine NIL collectives will still exist in the future. And really interesting time. And the funny thing too is there's so many questions still about the future of college football itself, right? Do we get a super league? Do the SEC and the Big Ten actually formulate something? Things like that. So a lot of balls up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, it's crazy. You mentioned that 13 to 20 number. You talk to obviously a lot of collectives, and just to sort of keep your finger on the pulse. Is that a 13? Do you consider that an average, or do you think like what's maybe the top 5 programs in the country? Where do you think they're at in terms of, let's say football? Let's say football collect like annually, where they think they need to be, and where do you think maybe a Power 5 average is, from just talking to the people you do?
So I'd say the top 5 programs, I'll say them too: Oregon, Texas, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Miami, give or take.
Mm,
There's some other schools in there too. I don't want to say it's only those 5, but
sure.
that is the 13 to 20 million I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
That's like, there's probably like 7 schools actually in that territory.
Yeah.
I would say the top half of the SEC, which includes Auburn, is probably in the 18 to $15 million range. The average Power 5, though, I mean, the bottom of these conferences are very bottom. So I'd say, I mean, the bottom you're looking at in some situations is like $1 to $4 million. So I'd say the average across the board is somewhere in the $5 to $7 million range.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think about a lot right now, as it pertains to Auburn specifically, because obviously that's the team I cover, and I know how Hugh Freeze sort of views NIL, and it's like I think he and a lot of coaches have to say it's good and the players deserve it, because the last thing you need to do is say something reverse of that and
Right.
have a player go, hey, you said publicly you're not sure we should get paid. So you got to support it, because
Mm-hmm.
you're recruiting, and you want to back the players up. If it looks like you're not backing the players up, you're kind of doomed. But I think the struggle with these guys is, one, somebody like Hugh does not want to be fundraising. It's not what he wants to do. And
Right.
some of these head coaches have to do that. They have to go literally fundraise at times. And I think he talked about every Monday in the spring, he was on the phone after
Yeah.
spring ball on Mondays. He was calling boosters. And I know Auburn's collective has other people that they've hired recently to do that. They just go fundraise, they go visit, and
Yeah.
they sort of do that. How far away are we? Because what I get, what the sense from talking to people that are involved in the collective, donors, people like that, is what they're being told from Auburn, and I'm sure this is the same other places, is, hey, just help us bridge the gap. We're not going to be hitting you up every year. This is a bridge the gap thing until revenue sharing comes into play or whatever. Just help us get from the beginning of NIL to where it becomes more structured, and you're not going to be hit up every winter for X amount. But like right now, we need you because we can't fall behind. We have
Yeah.
to bridge the gap from here to here, and then it'll sort of take over. But I think the struggle with some of these guys that are involved is, well, where is the end of the road? Like it
Right.
seems like we're not far, but is it 1 year, or potentially are you hitting me up for 2 more years? I think that's the struggle. Where do you maybe see a realistic timeline of the boosters not being hit up for every little thing and it changing to where, okay, now we're at the next phase of whatever this looks like?
I would tell you the earliest it's going to happen is the start of the 2025 like college football season, like that, like August. I think we could really see some things be put into play. At the same time, we talked about this house settlement, Justin, and we kind of have to see how it shuffles. So the thought is that everyone's going to agree on the broad terms tomorrow, the Thursday. But I mean, it's a months long effort in actually crafting, the attorney sitting down and actually writing up the full settlement, and that has to go in front of a judge. And then actually, like, athletes have to opt into the class action, and then the judge officially signs off on it. Like, so that's at least like 8 months, it feels like. So the quickest is going to be the 2025 college football season. Would be the revenue sharing. So yes, I think that's when we talk about maybe the boosters not having to be called on as much. I still expect boosters are going to have to be called on to some extent in the next world order of college football.
Yeah, but hopefully it's not, the way it is
Not
now.
to
Like,
the
hey,
extent.
I need another 100,000. Hey, I need 100,000. Maybe it's a smaller number and a more manageable number, especially if you take them all, a group of them.
Yeah.
It becomes something more manageable. You would think. How has it been for you sort of being in this world and talking to agents? Here's how it feels like to me, like where we're at. And I think it might have been Freeze. It might have been another coach that was talking about the massive jump from last year to this year in terms of NIL, in terms of what players are asking for. And it feels like I sort of equate it to a housing market that's out of control, where
Yeah.
it's like you're just in this market where, you know, some of the asking prices and people are meeting them. And so there's probably a group of people going like, geez, like, can we all stop overvaluing or just meeting whatever these demands are? Because maybe it's a program that's desperate and it's like, man, we need this one guy. Maybe it's a program that's just got so much money that they don't care. They'll overpay a little bit. What do they care? And it just feels like you're in that hot housing market where you go, a program could go say like, well, geez, we're giving you all cash offer for asking price, and you don't get it because somebody comes in there and is offering over, and everything just seems inflated. And the only way to fix it is you need everybody to like, hey, can we all agree to like pay somewhere around market value? But of course, you're not going to do that. So it's on one hand, it's like I feel like the players, it's not their fault. I mean, if they get it, they can get it. But it seems like it's so overinflated right now for a different, every player might be a different reason for why you get that. But what's like your sense of when you talk to agents? What's your sense of, do you feel that like, man, some of the asking prices and some of the money that people are getting promised is way more than what it should be? And do you think it'll change before this next phase, or is it just going to keep going up until like this next phase happens?
So getting back to like the root of the question about the portal and agents and all that, like
Yeah.
it is comical how many agents I deal with and how clear it is in moments about how they have told athletes to go in the portal for opportunities that just aren't there. Um, I'm not an agent. It's not my job to counsel athletes, but I run into a situation where athletes ask me to pump up a kid or something like that, and it's clear that they just don't have options. Or, I get lied to quite a bit too. So that's just reality and trying to cover the portal and NIL together. Past that though, like I know a lot of people don't like the idea of the spring portal window, especially in where we're at right now in college sports, just because it turns into like a renegotiation window.
Yeah.
For the programs who lost under 10 players, like kudos to those programs, because I can guarantee you it wasn't because everyone's just like happy and wants to win a national championship. It's because they have really good collectives who did a really strong job of negotiating contracts in December. And then when athletes called again in April, they made sure that they were ready to do what they had to do to maybe probably keep some players on rosters that they couldn't afford to lose. I think collective bargaining is probably going to have to be what has to happen for the portal to really come together the way I think a lot of coaches would like. And the reason why I say that is because there's so many lawsuits out there right now. Like there's a huge lawsuit in West Virginia that has forced the NCAA to change its policy when it comes to the portal. And because of that, I think that collective bargaining is probably going to be the only way that we see the transfer portal change, and maybe there only be one window or really regulated free agency like we see in the professional ranks.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you feel like you mentioned about the agent world? I couldn't imagine um dealing with agents in this world, because the amount of people that probably call you and want you to talk about the kid or toss out schools that are interested that aren't, to create value that's not there. How do you sort of go about, because I think you do a phenomenal job. How do you go about discerning sort of what's true, what's not? How much weight do I put on what he's saying? Okay, sounds like part of it's true, but maybe not to that extent. Obviously, the more people you can talk to about a subject, the better. But sometimes, you can't get every angle. How do you sort of go about figuring out what's true and what's not true in this sort of NIL agent world?
Yeah, it's a little tough too, because as much as sometimes maybe an agent lies to you, you also realize that they're not lying and a program's just really trying to keep something under wraps. So
Mhm.
that's the balancing act. If I have an agent reach out to me about a school that I just don't think is believable about an athlete, I just to the best of my ability, I reach out to the school and try to um, obviously get to the bottom of it and see what the facts are in that situation. I mean, beyond that too, though, I mean, it's also just like, hey, if an athlete reaches out, I need to like reach out to the school and be like, does this check out? Things like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's yeah, it's the funny thing too, Justin, is like it's also fun. Like I find some, I don't know, it's fun to go chase down a lead and things like that.
Yeah.
I enjoy that part of it, but you also got to make sure when people are lying or not. And I mean, I remember so I'm 27. This winter was my first time really going head first into the portal, and
Mhm.
had a couple quarterbacks tell me that they were going to go in the portal, and then coaching staffs refuted it. But at the end of the day, the athletes did end up going in the portal. So sometimes I've learned you just got to sit tight and trust your gut.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. Talk about Auburn a little bit.
Mm,
From kind of what you see afar, what do you think? Because I know one of the things I don't think people realize is you have good relationships with so many of these collectives because it's part of your job. You want to be able to call the collective and go, hey, whatever, and be able to ask them maybe a general question,
yeah.
or just kind of, hey, how do you, those guys are on the ground from afar. How do you think Auburn's collective has performed on Victory? Is their main collective? How do you think they've performed? I think Auburn did really good. I think in this portal, the spring portal window was surprisingly good. I was a little skeptical. I didn't know what caliber players Auburn could get. But there's a couple of really really important guys that they got. But what's been sort of your opinion the last 2 years, let's say, of On to Victory and your conversations with them, and sort of how they've grown and what they've been able to do specifically from a football perspective?
I think that On to Victory has really checked off a lot of the boxes they've needed to make sure that Auburn can get back to the standard that it wants to be at. I think that raising the funds has not been a problem for Auburn. Like that is truly a problem for some other schools across the country. That hasn't been something Auburn's had to deal with. I do know that, and you know this just as well as I do, right? They built a beautiful new facility. I know that was kind of something that they had to. It was a balancing act, obviously, trying to make sure that you're not over tapping donors all at once. But I think they've done a good job of that. Beyond that, I really like how Hugh Freeze has handled NIL. I don't think it's the only part of his calling card when it comes to trying to get guys out of the portal. I can also tell you, though, that while maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith did leave a little bit of money on the table by not going to A&M, I think that Auburn has done a nice job of making sure that they're coming up with competitive offers in that sort of situation. And when it comes to the portal too, Justin, like athletes aren't only going to schools because of cash. Like that is such a bad misconception. But what is true is when it comes down to a top three, athletes are definitely looking at the numbers and being like school X, Y, and Z. This is what they get, and that factors into a decision. After they've picked three schools maybe that they feel like are going to be best to get them to the NFL and things like that. It's the same thing with like facilities that we've seen in the last 20 years. Um, but no, I think Auburn's done a really good job, and I really like this spring portal class, like you mentioned. I think I was a little surprised too, to be honest with you. I didn't. They got some of the better guys on the line of scrimmage, and they didn't take a quarterback. I know some fans have some thoughts on that one, um, but hey, I think that the quarterback market really wasn't good this spring either. So you can make the argument there wasn't really anyone to go after and take.
It's crazy how much we talk about this, and it just sounds like we're talking about the NFL. We're talking. I mean, we might as well be talking about cap space and everything else. I literally will refer to it as that at times on our board. I'm like, there's X amount of cap space, and instead of spending most of it on a quarterback, you then can disperse it and get maybe a couple more players, or it helps you land a couple more players. I mean, it's just like we're talking about NFL free agency essentially. What do you think
What
about landing Keandre Lambert-Smith? That was a big one. Obviously, you were on our board, and it was Texas A&M Auburn, and it was a tight battle. and there for a minute it looked like A&M might land him, and Auburn pulls it out. How big was that one? Not just for on the field, but like as from a collective standpoint, it's one of the bigger wins Auburn's had in the portal. I'm trying to think that, the first, like last Freeze's first, I'm talking about in the Freeze tenure, they landed some good players last year, but I'm trying to think that's probably the biggest one so far in terms of going head to head against a collective that's got more money, a big time program, and winning a pretty big battle. How important was that both on the field and from a like perception sort of collective battle standpoint?
I think it really sets the tone for how Auburn's going to operate. And you look at it, it's the spring portal is really like next to December is really one of the few moments that Hugh Freeze has had to really build a roster how he wants to build it. And Texas A&M and Auburn did go head to head. I can tell you that from my understanding, I thought Auburn maybe had a better official visit, but A&M offered plenty as well. It did go down to the final minute. I just think that landing Keandre Lambert-Smith from a football perspective is probably one of the better pickups anyone's had this spring. And the reason why isn't necessarily because of what I think Keandre Lambert-Smith's going to do every Saturday. I think it's you got Cam Coleman in that wide receiver room who could win the Blitnikoff when all is said and done. And I think Keandre Lambert-Smith is a guy who maybe can take a little bit of the spotlight off Cam Coleman when he's on the field this fall, and maybe lets Cam have a couple games where he can develop. Because, I mean, you can speak to this better than I can, but I was of the perspective that they needed to bring someone in. So then Cam Coleman didn't have a rough freshman season where he's getting double teamed or things like that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. It's tremendous in that it takes pressure off of Cam, and it gives Peyton another reliable playmaking receiver. And yeah, it's like, is Keandre Lambert-Smith going to come in and go for 1,000 yards? No. No. But his importance is magnified because of how bad Auburn needed him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like his value on another team might not be the same. His value on Auburn's team, considering you can take a little pressure off Cam, also provide him with another veteran, because now you've got Robert Lewis that came from Georgia State and Keandre Lambert, two veteran college receivers that can really help Cam. Like Robert Lewis, everything we heard was he's like a coach on the field. So now you got two guys that have played a lot of college football, older guys that can really, I think, be mentors on Cam if Cam will lean into them a little bit. But then, of course, you see Lambert-Smith as he can do things after the catch. It's a guy that Peyton now can rely on. And now I think Peyton's got two veteran guys he can rely on. And then you've got Cam, who just ability-wise, you're going to toss it up to him sometimes, even if you're not sure who's coming. It's 50-50. You're like, I'm going to give my guy a chance. So pretty big for that offense to have another weapon. And then, of course, they added Isaiah Rakes from USC, Philip Bleedy from Indiana, and then Crawford from Arkansas State, who I think is probably an underrated addition. I think that's a guy that is completely probably overlooked, but that dude's a freak. And you pair him with now Jalen McLeod, and you have got two guys now that I think you got two guys now that can really come off the edge. Like, that's big time. It was all on McLeod last year. He was the only guy that really you could blitz, like that could really put consistent pressure. That was it. Now you got two of them. And anytime you can double up whatever it is, like adding Keandre Lambert-Smith, it's just a huge deal. So I think that's probably an underrated pickup. I think Freeze is a little uncomfortable in the NIL world. He's very protective so far of the culture at Auburn and what he's trying to build. And the thought of him of bringing in kids NIL, like overpaying for a guy and bringing him into a locker room and potentially introducing a lot of entitlement or whatever it might be. He's just very weary of that and a little stubborn about that. What do you sort of make of that approach? Have you heard other coaches? Do you think that's a common theme? Are other coaches saying the same things? Are you hearing like, yeah, like I'm a little worried if I overpay a guy, he's going to step in and go, well, obviously I'm the starter. You're paying me X. And then what if he doesn't win it? How could that affect the locker room if this kid doesn't win the job? Is he going to be toxic about it? Is it going to, whatever it is? What do you think about Hugh's approach? And then is it is he not alone in that, you think?
So we were talking about the NFL, right, and how college football kind of seems to mirror it these days when it comes to spending and things like that. I think something the common college football fan might not pick up on, and this happened at LSU as well. These schools don't not have the money. Like you look at like Auburn and LSU, and like I know some people have been really critical about how um just how some schools spend and they don't get a defensive tackle or things like that in the portal and things like that. I think what people need to realize is coaches don't want to bring in an athlete who they're going to like, maybe let's just focus on defense tackle here, Justin. Maybe you don't want to double your salary for a defensive tackle you bring in the portal compared to the guy you want playing next to him who has started 2 years, right? That completely miscues a position room. It forces coaches to have tough conversations, and it also just makes the athletes already in that position room disgruntled, and you probably need to like completely renegotiate contracts. And you can't have that happen in the middle of a portal. You know what I mean? Like you can't piss off 3 guys in your defensive tackle room when there's still 5 days left in the portal. Like that is the uphill climb that coaches are facing right now. So that's what makes it really tough when you feel like you have a really good position group and you just need 1 or 2 guys, and you got to be really careful about how the balancing act of it all. It's one thing when you have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who you could argue, right, he's immediately either the number 1 or number 2 guy in the room. It makes a little bit more sense. It's a little different when you're just trying to add a role guy or maybe someone that is not the biggest name, and some people in the locker room would have a lot of problems with making more money than they are set to make.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting it's an interesting dynamic for sure. And I think you bring up a good point about not having enough money. It's sort of, yeah, it's more nuanced than that. It's like they've got the money, but they don't want to overpay for different reasons. So they I guess if you had unlimited funds, you could just say, well, I can do all that. But I think the entitlement thing is sort of a limiting factor where it's like, yeah, I could pay him whatever, but then I got to think about the entitlement part of it. If that wasn't a part of it, sure, you could just pay whatever. But it's a totally different dynamic when you're thinking about your locker room and how it's going to affect things, and thinking about poisoning the locker room or things being toxic. And it's a big deal. I know Hugh is trying to build an internal structure of how to keep players in the program. Obviously, a big one's going to be producing getting you to the NFL. Georgia, for instance, it's so easy. They just go, listen, why would you want to leave? You're going to the NFL. If you do the right things here, you're going to the NFL. Auburn's got to get there. Auburn's got to get there and build that track record. But until you can do that, you can certainly build a culture that you want to be a part of. The next step is winning and having some draft picks that you can point to and say, listen, I know you're a backup now. If you do what you're supposed to do, you're going and you'll be a starter next year. And the way they view our program, you're going to the NFL. Auburn's got to get to that, because right now they can't say that. They've had some draft picks, but they haven't had just a prolific amount of draft picks. So I think that's the next step of, hey, you're going to win and we're going to get you to the NFL.
It's also cheaper to build a high school recruiting class that's really good.
Sure.
And I think that needs to be taken into account. And on top of that too, Justin, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, you don't want to over tap donors, right? Yeah. Well, a smart way of making sure to do that is making sure you have cash roll over year to year and you're not overspending your budget.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just going to be, probably the biggest, I would think some of the biggest question marks are portal. You get a guy, he's got 1 year of left. That's easy. The hard ones are a guy like, let's say, Cam Coleman, or another big one where you're going, okay, this is a game-changing freshman that will play immediately, that could change our program. But at the same time, you have to go in with a certain amount of, it's possible he leaves next year. It's entirely possible. Nothing is secure. Nothing is a lock. And I'm not saying that like Auburn fans should be worried if Cam's going to leave. I'm saying that from a perspective of, that's just the reality of where we're at. You would be naive and crazy to think that an agent or somebody isn't going to be in the head of any big time freshman that comes in, plays a year somewhere of going, hey, you got an awesome year, man. Let's just, let's make sure that Auburn's treating you fairly. And let's just, maybe I'll keep an eye out and see what's out there in the market.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that's probably a big time struggle too, when you're a program that's going to land a player like Cam Coleman or another big freshman. And you're like, golly, I've got to do it. We need him. He could change the program. But in the back of your head, you're going, man, if we devote these resources and I tap the donors for this, and then next year, how comfortable am I that this guy's in? Or do I think next year I'm going to have to renegotiate with this kid? Like, I would think that's got to be a part of your initial decision making. Like, if you just get the vibes of, man, this feels very much like in a year, this guy's going to come in here and want to renegotiate. And I don't know that all that's worth it. Or, hey, I think this kid is, yes, NIL is a part of it, but I think he is comfortable with what we're doing as a program. And I think we're in good shape for a couple of years. Like, that's a whole nother element to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the challenge. It's why I know we talked about this, but that's why the multi-year deal with Jaden Rashada, that's now at the center of a lawsuit. Like, that's what makes that so fascinating is, yeah, I mean, you don't see him as often as much as you did early on, but there are multi-year deals in college football that roll over that make it hard for athletes to get out of. But they've also become extremely less popular because of just how much money in those situations collectives end up being on the line for.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned the Rashada thing, which is nuts. I mean, I remember when that first went down and it leaked out about some of the like the fact that the collective, you know more about it, but the fact that he was promised $13 million. Everybody, and I think I remember tweeting at the time, it was a year or two ago, I don't remember when it happened. I was like, everybody involved in this should be fired. The fact that some kid was promised $13 million is insane, literally insane, first of all. But now you've just got this complete new element of they don't follow through, which he's high, obviously he's not the only player that probably hasn't had
Right.
things followed through on. And now you're suing the head coach, you're suing the collective. It'll be really interesting to see where that goes. And you mentioned, what's the flip side of, let's say they have this kid and they say, well, we want to sign you to a 2-year. We want to create a 2-year deal with a kid. Well, a year later, can the kid go, I'm not going to honor that, I'm out? Like, what are you going to do as a program? Are you going to sue the kid? Are you going to sue the agent? Like, how that would be a very risky. What kid would want to come to your program if they know if something changes in their life and they want to change their mind, you're going to like hold them hostage if they want to leave, if they do a 2-year deal? Like, that to me is a whole flip it around. And that's a very slippery slope. And I'm curious to see when the first time a player breaks a contract, and does the school go after him, or do they go, well, geez, what are we going to do? We go after him, we're going to look like the complete bad guy here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go into too much details, but what I will just say is there are some situations going on in the background right now that, like, I know of clawbacks and contracts that had to be sorted out this December. Of athlete was making X amount of money at school Y, he transferred to school Z. Now that school needs to pay back a portion of cash he was making at the previous school.
That's great. It's great.
Yeah.
We're trading.
What,
Yeah, we're
but
trading.
I mean, that's how it works. It's almost smart.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pro sport, right? It's like, hey, here's what's left on his contract. You can have the player, but you got to, all right, we want him, and we'll pay you to finish the contract. We've certainly seen that happen, and yeah, I guess that's the way to go. I guess if you're like, hey, we want this kid, all right, well, part of the deal is going to be we're going to have to pay the whatever, name a number, the $50,000 left over that, that they're going to, whatever that, that's interesting. That's really, really interesting, man. It just brings to mind so many deals in professional sports where you get players and you got about contracts, and I just immediately think of A-Rod. Hilarious. Well, let's finish on this. Where do you see the next year? So you think obviously nothing's happening before the 25 season. Is it possible that anything will be different before the winter portal coming, the next winter portal of 25, or even the spring portal of 25? Or do you think we're going to do this again through another winter, through another spring of 25? Everything will be like it was. And then we're probably looking at the winter portal after the 25 season, maybe before the structure of how NIL and portal players change? Or do you think there could actually be a difference in how things operate this coming winter or the next spring?
I want to be careful what I say right now.
Yeah. No, you can't read the future. We know that. Like, just a vibe.
At this point, at this very moment, I would be surprised if the 30-day winter transfer portal after the 2024 season is like non-existent or doesn't it doesn't happen or things like that. I don't think the portal is going to be changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to be living with a portal in the next evolution of college sports, unless we're all surprised and over the next few months, athletes start signing with players associations and there is legitimate collective bargaining, but that doesn't seem to be in the forecast right now.
Yeah. I think the quicker you can get, the quicker you can make changes, so real donor fatigue doesn't set in. That's certainly the better. And I just feel like we're in this time where we're in a very between time, especially even with coaches. Like, it's either coaches right now or old school coaches are having to either I'm adjusting or I'm going to get out.
Yeah.
And then you have some are adjusting and some are probably struggling. Like, I think Hugh is a guy that's struggling. Yeah, not like he can't do it. He's just like, he wants to do it a certain way and he doesn't want to do, so I think he's one of those coaches that's, get me to the other side of this, because he's great at building relationships and recruiting in high school, and I think he's a good evaluator of talent. But I'm sure and a lot of these coaches just cannot stand getting out there and asking for money and fundraising. They're like, man, there's so many other important things I need to be doing. So the quicker we can get on the other side of this, I think the better for everybody. All right, man. Well, where should people go to? We got your Twitter up there.
I'll be at on3.com whenever you need me. And if people have questions or anything, just my DMs are always open. I got an email on my Twitter bio. Happy to. I'm starting to feel like I might need to launch a mailbag here about what's coming.
You should, man. Like, it's so. I mean, I don't even know how we still get. I mean, there's still so many people that either on message boards or in person that ask questions, pretty general questions about NIL. That's there's still so many people that don't really get some of the basics or the nuances of it. It's crazy how long it's going to take before it's truly something that fans understand completely inside and out. Like, I think they still struggle with, like, well, do we have? It's so funny. Like, and now every time a school loses a player, it's just automatically viewed as, well, you don't have as much money. Like, that's just where people go now. It's like, well, you don't have the money. It's just an NIL. You don't have the money, and it's like there's a lot of things going on. Listen on this. How many players do you think truly are like, listen, here's my number. I don't much care about the city. I don't much care about the culture. Either hit the number and I'll come, or don't, versus the guys that say, yeah, NIL is important, but so is culture, so is playing time, and I'll take the lesser offer if everything else hits. Do you think it's 1 in 10 players are like, hit my number and I'll literally go to the middle of nowhere to play? What do you think the split is in terms of that?
I'm going to go like 3 to 4 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I think that people always laugh when I say this. I think it's really case by case. And I think that it's really tough to put like a percentage on it, just because of there's so many different levels of players. Like, if you're an SEC or Big Ten caliber player, I guess part of it is hitting a certain dollar figure, But if you're good enough to play at that stage, and just the power conferences in general at the top levels of those, if you're good enough to play, you're going to take less money because you feel like you're going to be on a national stage with the right backing around you and the opportunity to play in the NFL. And like if someone's choosing between like a crop of SEC and Big Ten schools, like odds are the money's okay all the way around, and they're really just trying to make the decision that's best for them.
Yeah.
And that means playing closer to home a lot in the portal.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people underestimate that too.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I mean, I think people can sort of think about it like the way you treat your job. I mean, it's always different. You're not necessarily just going to take another job because they're offering more money. You're going to look at everything involved, and if nothing else makes sense, but the money's better, but everything else makes zero sense to you, you may not do it. And so it's becoming more of a real world situation. I do love the lessons and the things these players, man. They're getting an education like on this stuff just so early that it's pretty awesome. And some of the stories I hear of players and what they're doing and how they're thinking about they're getting this money is crazy. I mean, because a lot of these guys get stipends for living off campus. They have meals already paid for. And so it's like, man, you've already got like your bills are paid for, your off-campus housing is probably paid for. You can go to the cafeteria and you got meals being made for you constantly. And then you're getting your NIL. Like if you're smart with it, man, I've heard stories of these guys taking their NIL money and they'll go buy a rental property. They're literally going and buying a townhome. And maybe they'll live in it, but then when they graduate, they'll keep it as a rental and stuff like that. Like it's wild. Some really smart things of some ways some guys are thinking about this. So there's a lot of interesting stories and stuff. All right, Pete, I appreciate it, man. We'll catch up maybe periodically and just sort of do, maybe before the season, we'll talk about where things are at. And I think it's good knowledge and good to catch up, especially like, our people, they just hear about Auburn, right? I feel like every school kind of maybe has an idea of where they're at. I think it's good to talk to you to sort of get where other schools are at. What's the sort of pulse and the temperature of the NIL world across the country, not just Auburn. So I appreciate you joining us and dropping some knowledge, man.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for having me on. You
got it. Make sure to go to auburnlive.com. If you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't been a subscriber, $1 gets you a month of access. So go subscribe to auburnlive.com and then turn on notifications at Auburn Live's YouTube page so that when we do things like this, it'll pop up and you won't ever miss anything. Appreciate Pete for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time.